The Book of Genesis. Genesis is the first book of the Pentateuch, which is made up of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. It is the first section of the Jewish and the Christian scriptures. Its title in English, Genesis, comes from the Greek of Genesis chapter 2 verse 4, literally, the book of the generation of the heavens and earth. Its title in the Jewish scriptures is the opening Hebrew word, Bereshit, which stands for in the beginning. The book has two major sections, the creation and expansion of the human race, and the story of Abraham and his descendants. The first section deals with God and the nations, and the second deals with God and a particular nation, Israel. The opening creation account lifts up two themes that play major roles in each section: the divine command to the first couple to produce offspring and to possess land. In the first section, progeny and land appear in the form of births and genealogies and allotment of land. And in the second, progeny and land appear in the form of promises of descendants and land to the ancestors. Another indication of editing is the formulaic introduction. This is the story. These are the descendants, which occurs 5 times in section 1 and 5 times in section 2. The composition of the book. As far as the sources of Genesis are concerned, contemporary readers can reasonably assume that ancient traditions were edited in the 6th or 5th century BC for a Jewish audience that had suffered the effects of the exile and was now largely living outside of Palestine. The editor highlighted themes of vital concern to this audience. God intends that every nation have posterity and land. The ancestors of Israel are models for their descendants who also live in hope rather than in full possession of what has been promised. The ancient covenant with God is eternal, remaining valid even when the human party has been unfaithful. By highlighting such concerns, the editor addressed the worries of exiled Israel and indeed of contemporary Jews and Christians. The 7-day creation account in Genesis chapter 1 tells of a God whose mere word creates a beautiful universe in which human beings are an integral and important part. Though Genesis 2 is often regarded as the second creation story, the text suggests that the whole of Genesis 2 tells one story. The plot of Genesis chapters 2 through 11, which highlight the creation, the flood, and the renewed creation, has been borrowed from creation flood stories attested in Mesopotamian literature of the 2nd and early 1st millennia. In the Mesopotamian creation flood stories, the gods created the human race as slaves whose task it was to manage the universe for them, giving them food, clothing, and honor in temple ceremonies. In an unforeseen development, however, the human race grew so numerous and noisy that the gods could not sleep. Deeply angered, the gods decided to destroy the race by a universal flood. One man and his family, however, secretly warned of the flood by his patron god, built a boat and survived. Soon regretting their impetuous decision, the gods created a revised version of humankind. The new race was created mortal, so they would never again grow numerous and bother the gods. The authors of Genesis adapted the creation flood story in accord with their views of God and humanity. For example, they attributed the fault to human sin rather than to divine miscalculation and had God reaffirm without changing the original creation. In the biblical version, God is just, powerful, and not needy. How should modern readers interpret the creation flood story in Genesis chapters 2 through 11? The stories are neither history nor myth. Myth is an unsuitable term, for it has several different meanings and connotes untruth in popular English. History is equally misleading, for it suggests that the events actually took place. The best term is creation flood story. Ancient Near Eastern thinkers did not have our methods of exploring serious questions. Instead, they used narratives for issues that we would call philosophical and theological. They added and subtracted narrative details and varied the plot as they sought meaning in the ancient stories. Their stories reveal a privileged time, when divine decisions were made that determined the future of the human race. The origin of something was thought to explain its present meaning. For example, how God acts with justice and generosity why human beings are rebellious, the nature of sexual attraction and marriage, why there are many peoples and languages. Though the stories may initially strike us as primitive and naive, they are in fact told with skill, compression, and subtlety. They provide profound answers to perennial questions about God and human beings. One Jewish tradition suggests that God, having been rebuffed in the attempt to forge a relationship with the nations, decided to concentrate on one nation in the hope that it would eventually bring in all the nations. The migration of Abraham's family is part of the general movement of the human race to take possession of their lands. Abraham, however, must come into possession of his land in a manner different from the nations, for he will not immediately possess it, nor will he have descendants in the manner of the nations, for he is old and his wife is childless. Abraham and Sarah have to live with their God in trust and obedience until at last Isaac is born to them and they manage to buy a sliver of the land. Abraham's humanity and faith offer a wonderful example to the exilic generation. The historicity of the ancestral stories has been much discussed. Scholars have traditionally dated them sometime in the first half of the second millennium, though a few regard them as late and purely fictional. There is unfortunately no direct extra-biblical evidence confirming or disproving the stories. The ancestral stories have affinities, however, to late second millennium stories of childless ancestors, and their proper names fit linguistic patterns attested in the second millennium. Given the lack of decisive evidence, it is reasonable to accept the Bible's own chronology that the patriarchs were the ancestors of Israel and that they lived well before the Exodus that is generally dated in the 13th century. Genesis chapter 25 verses 19 to 36 and 43 are about Jacob and his 12 sons. The stories are united by a geographical frame. Jacob lives in Canaan until his theft of the right of the firstborn from his brother Esau forces him to flee to Paddan Aram. There his uncle Laban tricks him as he earlier tricked his brother. But Jacob is blessed with wealth and sons. He returns to Canaan to receive the final blessing, land, and on the way is reconciled with his brother Esau. As the sons have reached the number of 12, the patriarch can be given the name Israel. The blessings given to Abraham are reaffirmed to Isaac and to Jacob. The last cycle of ancestor stories is about Jacob's son Joseph. The Joseph stories are sophisticated in theme, deftly plotted, and show keen interest in the psychology of the characters. Jacob's favoring of Joseph, the son of his beloved wife Rachel, provokes his brothers to kill him. Joseph escapes death through the intercession of Reuben, the eldest, and of Judah, but is sold into slavery in Egypt. In the immediately following chapter 38, Judah undergoes experiences similar to Joseph's. Joseph, endowed by God with wisdom, becomes second only to Pharaoh in Egypt. From that powerful position, he encounters his unsuspecting brothers who have come to Egypt because of the famine, and tests them to see if they have repented. Joseph learns that they have given up their hatred because of their love for Israel, their father. Judah, who seems to have inherited the mantle of the failed oldest brother Reuben, expresses the brothers' new and profound appreciation of their father and Joseph. At the end of Genesis, the entire family of Jacob/Israel is in Egypt, which prepares for the events in the book of Exodus. The historical and prophetic books constantly refer to the covenant with the ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Hosea 10 sees the traits of Jacob in the behavior of the Israel of his own day. Isaiah 51 verse 2 cites Abraham and Sarah as a model for his dispirited community, for though only a couple, they became a great nation. John 1, "In the beginning was the Word," alludes to Genesis 1 verse 1 and Proverbs 8 verse 22 to show that Jesus is creating a new world. St. Paul interprets Jesus as the new Adam in Romans 5 verse 14 and First Letter of Corinthians 15:22 and 24, whose obedience brings life, just as the old Adam's disobedience brought death. In Romans 4, Paul cites Abraham as someone who was righteous in God's eyes centuries before the law was given at Sinai.